Alice, welcome back to We Love Ugly Data, the Deep Analysis podcast. This is a special edition. In fact, it's a special edition for this month, November, and then there'll be another special edition next month of December. We'll come back to that in a little bit, if I remember, which I will try to because I've written it down. But this is episode 21 or series 3, episode 11, if you're collecting it in that way. Welcome back to people who've been here before. Welcome to people who are here for the first time. We have a format, and part of the format is talking about the format, but the format is different. I don't like change, but I have to deal with it. The format is normally 3 topics, 30 minutes, but we're talking about award winners this month for our innovation awards. So rather than being 3 topics, it's 5 award winners and 30 minutes. We've got all 3 of us on. But I'm going to try and be neat on time again and make sure that we are concise, which is hard because none of us are concise. So why are we having a special version of this? Why haven't we done it before? That's a very interesting question. Maybe we'll come back to that. But the reason we're doing a special this time is that last month we announced the 2024 Deep Analysis Innovation Awards, the exciting PDF version of which you can download, and we will make sure we repeat that several times. It's up on the screen right now for people who are watching. For people who are not, there's a description of what's up on the screen. Alan, I said that because we've not been very good at promoting this in the past, and bear in mind, we did a podcast last year and didn't mention it. Do you want to give us a little bit of an idea about the Innovation Awards, how many years we've been running it, why we do it, and maybe kind of what some of the criteria are, and then we'll get right into talking about this year's winners.
Clearly, I think this is the 5th year. I think we've been doing it well enough in the past. That's 100%. So the awards really came out of the fact that 6 years ago or whatever, we were sort of rounding up the year and seeing what had happened this past year. I sort of do that on a personal basis every year anyway, and was going through it, and it just kept popping up to me that there were wow moments, and you can remember them. We take a lot of briefings, travel a lot, meet with a lot of people. And it's funny, at the end of a year, you think that one, and that one. There you go, did not expect that. So that was the gist of it, really, was sort of. And then we sort of thought about it and thought, well, okay, we could do an award. But what would the criteria be beyond the wow moment, right? Because honestly, some of those wow moments were not award worthy. They were in that you cannot be serious. That's a really bad idea, right? So there's a methodology. It's in this report. Again, it's free for anybody to download. And I won't go through it into great depth, but it is an innovation award, right? So we are looking for something novel, right? So the truth is, when we hear the word innovation in tech, usually it's sort of alloy wheels on, or it's sort of they're flight up. I mean, that's businesses have to do that. But just every so often, you do have those things where you go, wow, they've just thought about this completely differently. They've done something really clever here. Well done them. It doesn't guarantee their success. It doesn't mean that we have given awards to people I won't name them because it's not fair, to companies in the past, and those companies are no longer around.
Well, this is part of the thing with innovation, right? We're placing bets on things which are early stage, often, not always, as we'll see in some of the winners, but in some stages, quite early stage companies.
Yeah, that's been an interesting thing. I mean, we'll go through that, I'm sure, here. But in the past, I mean, big companies like Microsoft and IBM have won. Oracle, I believe, was one of the early winners. So innovation comes, yes, we think straightforwardly that innovation comes from startups, but actually it comes from people, right? It comes from smart people. So they can be in big or small companies. But so yes, there's an emphasis on this. Wow, I hadn't thought of that. That's a really new, novel idea. But the other emphasis put in, and believe it or not, anyway, I'm quite strict about it, is it beneficial? Does it actually deliver something of value, right? Because a lot of cool stuff doesn't, right? Or nothing much anyway. So yeah, that's the genesis of it. And so we only had 5 winners this year. We've had more in previous years. can I just say before I sort of hand over to you guys, no, you can't apply for one.
Yeah,
that's not how it works. Okay, that is just not how it works, because I have actually had quite a few emails since we announced this. What is the what? No, it's not that kind of thing.
Yeah, you can't apply. A third party can't nominate you. It can only be nominated by us.
No,
that's one of the criteria.
Not work that way. And again, the details of how we do this are all documented in the report.
And just up on screen, we've got various pieces, including a blog post that Alan wrote, giving some summaries of it. So again, as you know, if you've been here before, there are show notes that will come out at the same time as this pod. So you're going to get links to everything. If it's your first time, there are show notes and they'll have links to everything. So don't worry, you don't have to write anything down or take screenshots or anything like that. It'll all be available either on the screen around you or in LinkedIn or wherever. We'll make sure you get to see that. Let's get into the winners themselves. Dan, first winner was Hyperscience. Do you want to talk a little bit about why Hyperscience and the Hypercell stuff attracted our attention this year?
Yeah, glad to, Matt. The reason why we selected Hyperscience this year actually goes back to something that we as a team recognized about 2.5 years ago when the LLM conversation really became part of mainstream and all the vendors we covered. And that was, we noticed that there was going to be an opportunity in the market to take unstructured data and convert that into a format that was ready for LLMs to use for training. And we covered some of the sort of early entrants into that. And Hyperscience, who was already known as a leader in what we would call the classic high volume IDP use case, this year they launched a new platform called Hypercell for GenAI. And it's an AI infrastructure platform that directly addresses that burgeoning demand to turn unstructured data into trainable data for LLMs. And we applauded that because the innovation there is not just technology, it's also business, which is part of our innovation awards. It has to be meaningful from a business standpoint as well.
Yeah.
And we thought that this was, Hyperscience was already known for working at scale, so they could take millions of documents and process them, bring the data out into a format that's usable for, say, your ERP system. And what they've done is they've taken that to the next level and made it so that you could feed, say, into a vector database and get the information ready. So data scientists can now be consumers of this data. And we thought that that was an innovation that's going to also allow them as a business to grow into new market areas.
Awesome. Alan, I just brought up on the screen the vendor vignette that was written a little while ago about Hyperscience, and that's partly to remind me to make sure we mention the fact that for all of the vendors that we're talking about here and dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of more, we publish vendor profiles or vendor vignettes, depending whether we use the current name or the old name for them. And I thought I'd bring those up on the screen. From what Dan said, how does this fit into a kind of broader perspective of what we're covering as an analyst firm?
Yeah, I mean, it's super interesting in the what we cover. It's clunky data and associated automation, right? Because that's the world, right? It's not, the silos do still exist, but much less so these days than ever before. It used to be document management, it used to be workflow, it used to be enterprise search, it used to be whatever, right? All these topics. And today, I mean, Hyperscience case in point, right? You are well, I think, and whatever. There's loads of them now where they don't talk about those things, right? They talk about automating business processes. They talk about leveraging unstructured data, and that's the world we live in. And we've been doing that really from day one. And it's nice to see that the rest of the world is catching up. It's sort of been this way for a while. But people really don't. You said you didn't like change at the beginning. Boy, that does not like change.
Yeah.
with this one and this one. Well, what about this one? Never heard of them. Then maybe you should, because they're winning big deals.
Oh, well, indeed. And I think we're going from Hyperscience, which is sort of like, I would guess we could call them a relatively mature player now in the areas that we cover, to someone who's a relatively new. Just to pick this up again a little bit about how you can find stuff on the website. On deepanalysis.net, you see the vendor analysis thing. You can have a little search through, and if you want to find the Hyperscience vendor vignette, you can just do a little search through and find it that way. You know how to use websites. I don't know why they put this in. I wanted to remind to make sure that people knew where to find things on the website. But let's get on to the next of the winners, which is AI2Z, which is one of those early stage companies, much earlier in life than Hyperscience, that we picked up earlier this year. In fact, we only wrote about it for the first time, I think, in April or May this year. The reason why we wanted to look at AI2Z is that a lot of the stuff around, and in fact, a lot of the stuff that we've written around AI, particularly GenAI, has been very much focused on hyperscalers downwards. So it's been very much on, you can do, big, large scale things if you're, Google or Salesforce or Microsoft, etc. AI2Z have a slightly different approach, which is this should be much easier to apply for smaller organizations, particularly where it appends to kind of front-end customer-facing stuff. Now, the background of AI2Z's founding team is in web content management. So this fits very much into that web content management, so software that produces websites. For those of you who are familiar with web content management is, there's a traditional pipeline for those into search. So bolting on search onto websites, it's kind of old hat, if you like. It's been here as long as the consumer web has. But when you publish something, that adds into a search index, and then people can find things. So that's an established workflow. What AI2Z have done is use that existing workflow, which can be bolted into those existing web content management systems, and enabled that to be publishing into RAGs or into kind of agentic workflows to make those high-end sounding stuff much more accessible to smaller organizations, so medium-sized organizations. And certainly that Alan and I, we spoke to them, actually an update about 1 or 2 weeks ago. And a lot of what they were talking about now, particularly around agentic, was on hospitality use cases. So taking away front desk functions in hotels and resorts and placing those into agent things. They might seem to be quite simple use cases, but as Dan pointed out, talking about Hyperscience here, these are real business use cases. These have actual directly applicable uses right away, but also the platform itself doesn't require you to have a particularly AI savvy dev team. This is focused on partners, the people who do the implementations from platforms from WordPress, like we run deepanalysis.net on, upwards. So it's designed to be relatively accessible for non-specialist systems integrators. So it's a little bit different to some of those the larger AI, upscale AI platforms that we've been covering this year.
I'd also add to that one thing, which with them in that first briefing was their focus on putting good guardrails in, which a lot of people talk about but don't actually do. They just the customer to think about. Company used to have a startup in the healthcare sector. They know all about the guardrails, right? And that for me was probably the thing which tipped it, is that from day one, they realized that the fine to put some good guardrails in. If somebody asks you this, you can't answer it. You cannot share this. You cannot share that. And it's simple. Again, it's simple, but others are doing that. Yeah,
and I think I mentioned a few minutes ago talking about the consumer web as a concept, and we're talking about something which is over 30 years old. But what that kind of democratization of technology does is it puts this stuff in more hands. And ironically, what drives innovation is putting technology in more hands. Sometimes, or often, in fact, it's their hands outside the specialist to find use cases that haven't occurred to them. And if actually what gets interactions with Gen AI, particularly the emerging agent world, is what seems to be relatively facile front office things like hotel concierge and facilities questioning. If that's the thing that breaks down those barriers and the resistance to doing it, and involves a lot of the smaller non-specialist partners, actually that's good news for the industry in general, because it takes away a lot of those fear factors about the technology, fear factors as well for customers. So I don't want to be overselling AI1Z here, but I think it's a very interesting, accessible set of use cases. Taking the technology and putting it in the hands of mid-scale partners and mid-scale organizations from the get-go, and not leaving that just for the big brands and big organizations to talk about. So onto our next winner, Dan. The company that I always want to pronounce Rossum for some reason, but Rossum. Do you want to talk a little bit about how Rossum ended up with an award this year?
Yes. Earlier, both of you and Alan mentioned that there's no way that a company can apply for an innovation award, and also we're not pay to play. But I thought about it when I'm looking at Rossum. There is a way that a company, if they really want to get an innovation award from us, they should read our early predictions on things. Because we called out Hyperscience because we had an early prediction that the data market was going to be hungry for all the unstructured data, and that was a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Last year, Alan and I did a piece, and we talked about the fact that domain-specific LLMs would be far better for business process automation than foundational LLMs from the likes of OpenAI.
Yeah.
And here we are now, a year and a half later, and we called out Rossum because they introduced what they call the transactional LLM, or TLLM for short. And that was trained only on transactional business documents, millions of them.
Yeah.
Mostly used in the accounts payable, accounts receivable, or what sometimes people call P2P, pay to purchase process. So these are invoices, statements, bills of lading, et cetera, et cetera. And by training it only on those document types, it does zero-shot classification and data extraction, and it sort of already understands the domain of the documents that you're bringing it. So it really, really cuts back on the chance for hallucination by training it specifically like that. And we saw that as an innovation, certainly for invoice processing, because they were the first ones that we saw in that particular space that was deploying specific LLM trained just for that domain. So yeah, that was something that we called out, and we thought not only is that technical innovation on top of LLMs in general, but it's also a very, very smart business move.
Yes, no, certainly. I know that as a team, all three of us have discussed this in the past, and we're seeing more and more of these specialist things come along. Alan, how does this kind of fit into a little bit about into what we've been talking about specifically? I know these are conversations that you're having with not just with vendors and customers, but also investors as well.
Yeah, well, so it's interesting. I mean, and this is normal. I'm actually writing a column in KM Mara's law, which is we tend to overestimate the short-term impact of new technology and underestimate its long-term impact and stuff. And at the moment, long story short here, there's been a lot of hype, right? So everybody was investing in anything to do with Gen AI. The reality is that here, some of that's going to work, some of it isn't. That's just a shotgun approach. Throw everything out there, see what sticks. Yeah. And hopefully what we're trying to do, and others obviously, is say, well, yeah, okay, right here, so the domain-specific LLM, meaning the data for LLMs, etc., building accessible and easy to manage agents, etc. These are good areas within a lot of noise, because the noise is still deafening. I mean, we've moved on from GenAI being the big sort of thing in the room to everything being agentic or agent based or whatever. So it is also reflective of our industry. People want to talk about AI in every single conversation. It's not relevant in every single conversation.
Oh no, I think you'll find out it is relevant in every conversation, regardless of its applicability. At least we say that, and everybody that's coming along the awards this year had at least some AI element to them. So we're just as guilty, I suppose, in that sense as everywhere else. But thanks also, Dan, for reminding me to mention again that next month will be the 2024 predictions, and part of the 2024 predictions episode will be looking at last year's predictions and seeing who got it right and seeing who got it wrong, or seeing maybe in Dan's case, whose prediction was so difficult to measure, we won't know whether it was right or it's wrong. So we'll probably just say it was right, which I think was exactly the point of that prediction, Dan. But we'll come back. That's a call forward from next month. Let's get on to the next of the winners from this year, which is Composable. Composable, another small startup organization, but targeting a very different portion of the market to AI1Z, where AI1Z are very much focusing on those who don't necessarily have the skills and looking for partners, mid-scale partners to help them. Composable are targeting those organizations who've already invested quite a lot into trying to make LMMs and now more specialist models work for them, but realizing the tools to manage running multiple models, building synthetic models, increasingly using synthetic data to help test models, requires an awful lot of lash up DIY tooling. And strangely enough, this is another organization whose antecedents come actually from a content management background, more of which you can find in the Composable vendor profile, and I'll put the links into the show notes. You can actually download a copy of this from Composable's website. So if you actually want to read this in detail, you can go to their website, fill in a form. I'll put the link in. You can get the entire VV gratis on their behalf here. So they're targeting those organizations who have found actually at the moment there isn't really yet the large scale enterprise tooling to support this. There are other platforms under the Composable. Composable was I think the first one that we really spoke to. But again, catching up with them last month, they're now looking at, and with something we called out, talking a little bit around Agent Force, about this is very much looking at kind of agentic is really a way of talking about sort of process orchestration, right? And you can come to that from we own the process. You can come to that from we own the content, and platforms like Composable are coming from that from we understand how the AI part works. But they're all heading in the central direction, which is we want to be able to orchestrate a bunch of processes. The value of those processes ultimately, and this how successful they work, is the value of our platform, right? So depending what direction you're driving this from, you're actually going to be pointing almost at the same kind of direction in some kind of mad technological race right now. And I think that's kind of I look forward a little bit about what sort of 2025 is like, and perhaps a little bit of a idea about what next year's predictions will be like when we talk about them. Alan, I know you've been very much at the chalk face of some of those discussions around agents and that kind of stuff. But I also know that you sat in with me and talked to Composable. Is there anything you'd like to add here, which is sort of helped contextualize them?
Well, I don't know about contextualizing it, but I do find it interesting, and I think it's terrific that if we take AI2Z, I think how to pronounce that one, and Composable, they're both from our world, right? These are people who've had startups, successful startups in the past. They've innovated in the past. I think it's quite cool how they didn't just, right? They've come up with something else. They're still innovating. So I think that's a nice sub story there. But yeah, I mean, the thing is with Composable, I'm going to be honest, when we first talked to them, it was completely going over my head. I mean, it's really, really, really techies developer stuff, right? But then the penny drops. Yeah, it is really, really complicated. And they are, much like AI2Z, try to simplify it and make it actionable, right? Because when I took a briefing and I thought, well, okay, how would you do this without composable? Wow, that is a level of complexity, and things are going to go wrong, and things will go wrong. And I think it's a similar thing. You could almost just call this a UI, in the sense that it pulls all the bits together and makes sense of them, right?
Yeah, and I think the messaging you're getting a lot from the large application providers right now is to their customers, the people who live in their walled garden, which is don't bother trying to touch that. It's too complicated. And what's interesting, and I can understand why they're doing that. What's interesting is that both Composable and AI1Z are both saying, no, it's not complicated. For this audience, this is exactly the right sort of tooling for them. Different audiences, but very much tooling specific to where they are in terms of their maturity, their skill set, and ultimately their kind of their business processes they're trying to drive that way. So that's what makes them, I think, kind of interesting. So on to the last of this year's winners, UiPath. Dan, do you want to talk a little bit about why UiPath won this year, and specifically the work I think around LMMs? I think is the reason why they got the nomination.
Yeah, glad to. And this is, of course, there's a matter of timing here. I'll talk about why we chose them for this, but this was before the deadline. And after the deadline, Alan and I went to their conference in Vegas, and I think I'll let Alan update on what we saw there. But so UiPath, this was actually, for me, this was a sort of a tough one, because there are a number of companies that make automation products, BPM, workflow, RPA, whatever you want to call it, but it's all coming together under automation. And I think we called out UiPath because, again, they put in the work to create not just one, but two domain-specific LLMs, DocPath and CommPath. CommPath is a technology based on the acquisition of Reinfer, a UK company that we covered in the past, who had some excellent natural language processing technology for emails and messages. So apart from the technology, because UiPath has done their work here, they're good at it. But apart from that, if we step back and take a look at the bigger picture, UiPath has built an orchestration platform that you can plug all this into, and you can get content, unstructured data, and bring it easily into your workflows. For that, it's more of an innovation in bringing it all together under one developer platform called Autopilot, and making it a little bit easier to put all that together and get that into production a little bit faster. So I got a bit of stick on this one. I think Alan was alluding earlier to, when we make our choices, we hear sometimes from people who go, what? I got a bit of stick on this one from a couple people, and to them I had to say this. Hey guys, you didn't bother to brief us on your thing this past year. We don't see everything. We don't have, I don't know how to say it, but we're brief to play. That's what I tell them, okay? If you don't brief us on it, don't expect us to go dig it up off your website. We're busy. Hats off to UiPath. They took the time this past year twice to brief us with their technical people in those briefings, so we could ask the hard questions. So there's a little tip for the rest of you for next year. Over to Alan on what we saw in Vegas.
That's a really good point. I mean, obviously, the big player in the analyst world is Gartner. Gartner doesn't talk to everybody. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of vendors out there, right? And the truth is, we do the best we can. But Dan's got a very good point. If you don't reach out to us, and here's the thing, you don't have to be a client. You can literally go onto our website, fill in a short form, and ask for a briefing. And frankly, I'm going to go as far as to say, if you are in the unstructured data management or unstructured data automation world, whatever we want to describe, or however we want to describe it, we'll probably talk to you. right? Because you might have something really interesting to say.
Oh, we'll certainly talk to you, and you know what? We might even write something about you, and just up on screen for those people who are watching and those people who are listening. Because UiPath has a large number of product lines, we just don't write one, one vendor profile on what. We've got one on here on discovery tools as well as the ones on the RPA tools. So there's multiple pieces that we can write. If you've got multiple product lines, we can look at it in that way. Specifically about the conference, because I went to the London leg of the conference back in whenever it was, July or something, and you'll see yourself and Dan were in Vegas last month. How do you see, what did you get from that would kind of add to that story that Dan was just telling?
If you order an appetizer, you're in for more than you're expecting. Dan had the biggest appetizer of my life at dinner. But do you know what? Does a good conference. Well, and I think a lot of to talk to their customers, to be able to their executives, right? It's gold for analysts. It really is. But for the customers, I mean, I sat at lunch listening to two guys from healthcare and one from transportation and logistics, actually basically swapping UiPath war stories and helping each other.
Cool.
We do forget that, the years of COVID and everything, this is a community. We mentioned, I keep mentioning them, but AI2Z and Composable, we've known these people in the past, right? It's a huge market in terms of money, but it's not a huge community, right? We do know each other, we bump into each other, and I think it's really important. And for UiPath, yes, they did a good job. They were very clear that they want to be the orchestration leaders. Mm-hmm. That separately, because they're not the only one.
Well, everybody wants to be king. Only one person can be king, and I think that's kind of maybe a call forward to the prediction thing for next month. We're up at time already. That's a half an hour that went past incredibly quickly. First of all, I want to thank all the people who briefed us, who put their products into the funnel, if you like, put their organizations into the funnel for us to select. You'll notice if you go back to the previous years, there's an odd number. Sometimes it's this number, sometimes that number win awards. It's not because we have a certain number of slots to fill. If there aren't enough innovations, we don't issue enough awards, right? That's how it works. This is genuinely, we'll put the number of awards to the number of companies that really kind of wowed us, which makes it a very unpredictable result. But isn't that part of the fun? Dan, thank you ever so much for joining us. And Alan, again, thanks for that. You'll be both back on next month to do predictions. I think we've probably given enough of a trailer for that. Those of you who joined us for the first time, hope you come back again. Those of you who come back again previously, thank you. Please keep watching and keep listening. Really appreciate it. And we'll speak to you next month. Thank you.